dream was that I was ushered into a room and there was a nurse and two nurses and another woman, and on this table, a bit like this table here, there were two modular systems of DNA which are about 2 feet long and all full of these nodules coming off them. One was quite large and one was quite medium size, and I knew as soon as I saw them that these were my children, these two. One of the nurses started picking one up, and I thought that was a bit rough, and I said, you've got to be more gentle with it. This is a very delicate thing, creatures, or my children. And then another nurse picked up the first one and wrapped it in a towel like a child and handed it to me. This modular DNA child of mine. So I held it and I thought, this is my child, and I knew it to be a male child. Beautiful experience. I passed it back. Then picked up the second larger modular system and handed it to me, and it was very heavy. And I knew it to be a female child. And I put this modular system over my left shoulder, like I used to do with my children when they were very small. Particularly my first child, he used to very like when we were going for walks, just go over my shoulder and sleeping. There used to be a sleeping movement and jogging around. So I put this modular system over my shoulder, like a baby, and then at that moment I became aware that this modular system, my child, my female child, was transmitting to the cosmos and receiving information in some vast system of interchange. And that I knew that I could receive it in my heart. My heart at that moment leapt and started pounding in response. And then took and I mean, I don't say it in the sense of it being terribly special, because I know hundreds of people who've given me dreams which are just phenomenally like that, and even more astounding. So this is like a common thing in the human species. Here we have something which is connected to the cosmos. It's transmitting. It's a transmitter. Part of our psyche is transmitting and receiving vast amounts of transpersonal, we call it now, information, which can help us in our creativity, in our growth, and our natural healing, because we're connected at that level, through nature, to the whole cosmos. So, continued growth of Eastern practices, point number 4, in the open competition of religions for the soul. Yes, religions have declined, but let's not forget it's been open competition. Religion did try and destroy science and try and torture Galileo and a lot of other people and burn them at the stake. But to the best of my knowledge, science hasn't done that to people in religion, has it? It's open competition idea system, isn't it? And if Darwin has triumphed temporarily or for a long time, then that's an open system of ideas, is it not? No one's persecuting you for having other ideas. You know, a great deal anyway. Generally speaking, if you want to set up a religious system based upon worship of Isis and an Egyptian cult, you can, can't you? No one's going to come knock on your door and say, come to prison and we're going to torture you. It's an open competition system, is it not? This is what Popper called the open society. It's about freedom and about competition, including the competition of ideas and including the competition of religious and spiritual ideas. Is that not so? Yes. So, in this competition, which has now become global and by the internet and so on, the Eastern practices, of course, have been assimilated. And although Jung was said that we shouldn't really adopt too many Eastern practices, we're not really made for it because we're Westerners, the people have voted with their souls and have voted for it, haven't they, by and large. And Eastern practices have grown in strength. Why? Because they work. Why? Because meditation techniques, yoga techniques, and the vast information and traditions of the East are extremely valuable and have given succour to the soul. Secret of the Golden Flower was one of our things, not just the Chartre experience, but secret about the reason why I chose it was because it corresponded to a process that I learnt in psychotherapy and also from the Secret of the Golden Flower, and applied it in psychotherapy, and it's to do with the circulation of the light. Everybody recognises we have darkness inside of ourselves, the shadow. How many of us recognise we also have the light? A real light not real, sorry, so I'll go into that, a fundamental primal light inside of us which can circulate and can help us in our connection to the cosmos, our connection to a God, our connection to a universal intelligence, and that can promote healing and growth and give us wisdom and instruction and help. What Jung called the self. That this is a light, and that the Secret of the Golden Flower, more than any other text and cult or religious group that I've met, have made this central to their process, this circulation process, and understand the inner dynamics of the soul and how it works in its healing process. And that's why I chose The Secret of the Golden Flower, because it goes over this in a very poetic manner, but it's very instructive. If anybody wants to interrupt and say something, that's fine at this point. I know there's a lot of very provocative, fast-flowing ideas. As part of the Groff interview, the next one, the Groff video, Tarnas gave a group of slides, which I've copied here, which try and present diagrammatically the transition into the modern world and what has happened to the self or the soul. That in the primal worldview, he suggests that we have the self, which is relatively open to the greater intelligence of the whole world and the whole cosmos. Intelligence in the soul is shaded, and that shading spreads from outside to inside, and the self is relatively porous. The soul is porous and open in primal systems to nature and to rebirth and to the universe. In the modern worldview, he suggests that the intelligence and purpose have been confined to just within the human beings. The world is not ensouled. The universe is not anima mundi. The self has just become the soul centre, and the surrounding world has become dead. I mean, you might say maybe some of the great religions have done this and have said that only the human being is a soul and the rest of the world is dead. In the primal worldview, the transition into the modern worldview, the human self has been radically differentiated from the world. It has a strong boundary around it, and there is me and there's the world outside, and I can analyse it and try and master and control it. But in the primal worldview, you are part of, and the outside world filters in, and yourself, parts of you filter out in a participation mystique, to use that word again, that phrase. He says the ground of meaning and purposeful intelligence has been relocated from the now disenchanted cosmos, disenchanted, to an empowered autonomous self, the human empowered self. In the Western religious worldview that emerged in the primal and modern, forming a link between them, the human self bears a unique relationship to a transcendent divinity. So, for example, in the Christian worldview, there is a transcendent divine. It's no longer in the world. The world has been created from the transcendent, but essentially is under the control of the self. And the self is linked to a off-planet, so to speak, transcendent divine. In other words, the divine is no longer in the world or in nature, like in shamanistic cultures or great mother cultures. Nature is no longer alive and no longer mysterious or numinous or spiritual. And in the late post-Copernican, post-Nietzschean cosmos, where we are now, post-Copernicus, post-14th, 15th century, and post-Nietzschean, post-19th century, God is dead. The human self exists as an infinitesimal and peripheral island of small meaning and spiritual aspiration in a vast and purposeless universe, signifying nothing except what the human self creates in it. What do you say it could be?
Well, to me, the mystical, possibly Eastern worldview would be that the self, if you imagine that self in the primal worldview, the self expands and is bigger than the world. The world is inside the self. There is inside the world what we might call the small self, which some call illusory, but is real as the rest of the world. But it's all the self. You need to swap the words around, world and self.
Yes.
And to me, that is the reality.
So Atman is Brahman.
Atman is Brahman, and there is only Brahman. Brahman is one.
So the world is only There's only Brahman. It's only this vast.
Although you don't have to go with it being an illusion, it doesn't mean there isn't a world.
Mm.
But it's this
Yeah.
paradoxical situation,
Yeah.
and that arises that.
Yes. I think many people will be satisfied if we return to something resembling this and a new spiral development, as it were, with the self reopened to the world, an enchanted cosmos. But yes, I mean, I think not enough.
Not enough. It's nowhere near enough. Nowhere near enough. Not the same thing at all. Because
Okay.
the self, paradoxically, is at once contains the world and all this dynamism and everything we see, and it is at once entirely silent and unmoving and does nothing, never has, never will, never could. So, unless you change the diagram entirely, I don't know how you contain. Yes, I mean, I suppose on another level, yes, you spiral out. So the small cell spirals out until it contains the world and then knows itself to be Atman, the self, or no, to be Brahman. But
Do you think in those fractal kaleidoscope images that we looked at earlier on, do you think that's what they're getting at? That there can be some system at the centre which can grow into the totality and vice versa, some interpenetrative relationship between centre and circumference.
The experience from the level of the small self. The experience from the big self is that nothing ever grows, nothing ever went. There was never a time when you weren't the self.
Yeah.
You know, there was never a bit where you weren't the self and then by some process you became the self.
Yes.
You were always the self. What else is there to be?
Except when you thought you weren't.
You thought you weren't,
Yes.
but then you can think all sorts of funny things.
Yes.
Doesn't mean it's true.
I mean, Blake, in corroboration of what you're saying, Blake said that God is a circle whose circumference is everywhere and whose centre is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere.
Well, there's your black hole, and it's also the mystery.
So we could have some suggestions, please, by email and attachments, which you could draw some diagrams for us to contemplate. Okay. So a creation myth is in formation, I would suggest. We're talking about, I think, essentially old wine in new bottles, to use an unbearing phrase. Old wine in new bottles. We need new bottles. We need a new container framework for the old wine, for the old wisdom to come alive in and be interpreted to us. Many people can't bear, for example, nowadays, some part of Christian doctrine. But having been someone who's brought up in Catholic doctrine and who reacted against it and went his own way, I mean, I can listen to some of the prayers and that I was brought up with, and if I just give them a different context, they can seem like old wine in new bottles. I mean, one. If I took out the patriarchal element of it, which has become very unfashionable, but I took one of the simplest of prayers I was brought up with was, "Glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, worlds without end. Amen." It's extraordinary. It comes from the Middle Ages, but if you took out patriarchal elements and the Trinity and substituted Atman and Brahman, which is far more acceptable to us nowadays, and something else, then what we have is an image of some unity with the divinity across infinite time. So the world's religions are scattered with these things. I'll just tell you briefly one dream I had 2 nights ago, which preceded this. As I was wrestling with these ideas, I woke up in the morning and realised that I'd had the dream, which is about somebody saying to me, a woman, she was saying to me, the seeds in the desert have lain there for thousands of years. And I understood by what she was saying that, of course, seeds in the desert once they have rain, they can grow again, can't they? Even in deserts, after thousands of years, seeds can survive. The DNA survives. Okay, seeds in the desert. And I understood within the dream, not afterwards, that this applied to the quest and what I was struggling with, but trying to give some form to, in terms of ancient wisdom and new bottles, and that this was not just about physical seeds, but it was about spiritual seeds, sower and the seed, the seeds which have been sown into humanity in all the ancient religions, and that we can recuperate the best of those. And that I understood within the dream that some of those seeds would grow, like in the parable of the seed, sowing the seed, some would grow, and some wouldn't grow. We can, as it were, the ones that are suitable for the modern age and our modern crisis will be the ones that will flower in this desert of the modern soul, of this tiny self and big, this search for this meaning that you just described. That some will be, and some of those will be in the East, a lot will come from the East, and some will come from the world's great traditions. A creation myth is in formation, greatly inspired in the modern age. It needs some fuel. Where does the fuel come from? It comes, actually, some of it comes from evolution and physics. Aurobindo, the great mystic, Hindu mystic in the early 20th century, I was one of the first to incorporate, like Teilhard de Chardin, a theory of evolution into divine manifestation into the world, that it happened through evolution rather than an act of creation. And physics, of course, has been, as we've already explored, has been a great inspiration, hasn't it? Matter, life, consciousness have evolved, and God also is manifest and immanent in evolution. There is a vast intelligence that saturates the void. The void is really, from what we now understand, the vast void, cosmic void, is a plenum, isn't it? Plenum means full in Latin, the fullness. It's a vast fullness, in fact. The life system, the human body and consciousness are inherent in this vast intelligence. The cosmos has a soul. We are part of that soul. It's not a part of us, we are part of it. The quantum field underlies matter and energy, as explained by physics, and also somehow it underlies the life system, yet to be explained how it does that. Although chemistry, at the border of its discipline, is in its analysis of enzymes and life system, coming across more and more, you find these references to the quantum field underlying chemical analysis, like in enzymes, for example, which are essential to the DNA process.
It's coming up in neurobiology as well.
It's coming from neurobiology, and it's coming from YouTube as well. That's where I get my information. There is an implicit and an explicit order. So David Bohm, the explicit order is the phenomenal world and matter and what we see around us and the forces of nature and physics and chemistry and so on. But underneath that, there's a vast implicate order, as he calls it, implicate and explicate, which underlies it. This is the eternal philosophy called the perennial philosophy, that there's a vast underlying intelligence and meaning underneath our phenomenal world. In this emerging metaphysics, we have a number of things that come up constantly that are always mentioned. For example, there's a number of incredibly fine-tuned constants have made the universe possible. They're so extraordinarily fine-tuned that it's difficult to believe that they're incidental, coincidental, or accidental. I'm looking for the right word now. The universe is designed for life and consciousness, as if it knew we were coming. Our psyche is designed to attune to a universal intelligence, as attested in many people's dreams and visions and so on. I've just told you one. We are not separate, but a meaningful part of this vast intelligence. Some talk of co-creation. Human consciousness is a constructed reality and is surrounded by a vast multidimensional field. The space-time causality coordinates, space, 3-dimension, time, causality, another dimension, as realized by Kant, are a priori categories, which he meant they're categories of our consciousness. They're not real descriptions of the world. They're descriptions of how our consciousness must approach the world and extract a living from it. They're not some ultimate reality, as Kant explained in the 1700s. The hologram is a metaphor increasingly used to describe the appearance of the universe out of another order entirely, some other order of dimension on the, as it were, the cosmological horizon, can produce the events that we know and the processes in the explicit world. Human consciousness is separated off from the greater self. We know this from all the world's great religions, and we know it also from Jung, Conscious and the Unconscious. We know it from The Secret of the Golden Flower. This is part of the perennial philosophy, is it not? That our consciousness is separated off from the greater self and thinks it knows what's happening. McGilchrist has also given another vast metaphor for the right-hand side, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, which also feeds this information into us, that really we're part of a far greater whole, and it's part of us. It's actually part of our brains. Our consciousness consists of different dimensions: instinctual, obviously, unconscious, conscious, and higher consciousness, as previously indicated, transpersonal. We have a purpose in relationship to the universe, to develop our consciousness, nowadays respect our planet, we've become aware of that, and unite with the cosmos and nature. The universe seeks to be fulfilled through us. That is our meaning. It wants to fulfill it through us. We are, as it were, the pilgrim on the quest to allow this seeds to grow through us. We are in the transpersonal realm at the beginning and the end. Like Groff at the beginning, at the end we can talk about, for example, religions and Jung and so on. In the middle we are a conscious separated state of our egos. In this emerging physics, the gods, we realise, are projections of our own selves. The plenum, this vast intelligence that saturates the universe, is personally invested in every individual. We're not insignificant. Everyone is personally invested in. Just as every great religion has told us, and the Christians told us, that God is invested in us, in our soul and in everything we do. We're dominated by, of course, in all these myths, of the myth of separation and return, that we have been separated from and we long to return to this greater unity. And talking more practically, communities, their economies and social structures require new vision for their survival, and we need new language. I mean, Jason just gave one about the addiction language, that we need new ways of getting into our understanding of what has separated us off and dominates the human psyche. We are meant to love, be attached and integrate with others to come alive in a fully embodied reality. Family systems in particular are our biological foundation and are being very severely threatened in the 21st century. This integration stretches to the animal kingdom, integration with all of creation, all of animals, all of life, and the earth. A deep ecology becomes part of this new vision. We have so many parts of the elephant that we're uniting together for a new vision, and we are meant to integrate ourselves, and this has an implied ethical system in this new vision. It's not just about cosmology and about, wow, isn't the universe, the black holes, aren't they all amazing, man? And it's all mind-blowing. It's not just about that. It's about a completely integrated system, realizing the elephant, as so to speak, the greater self, being integrated into a new system which even includes ethics. That I believe the emerging metaphysics has an implied ethics, which we can find in Carl Jung, for example, which we'll look at in a moment, finally. This was taken from, you can't see this very well unfortunately, but it's basically taken from Washburn, who has written this book which I recommended you. Maybe you haven't read it, but maybe you can, which is The Ego and the Dynamic Ground. Although he's not a psychotherapist, you'd never guess that. He has such a grasp of the depths of the psyche. He describes some process from pre-birth, womb and the universe, a la Groff, the Great Mother in the early period, and the stages of the ego's situation as it becomes disembodied and represses the primal ground by which we're connected to nature and to others and part of the world and the cosmos. And we disconnect from that transpersonal realm, and even that emotional realm increasingly we disconnect from as we go through childhood, latency, adolescence, adulthood. Those of you who've had children will know that a child can hit adolescence and turn into a radically different person and repress everything that the parents knew in that child. Well, that's typical of the growth process of many human beings, that they repress and disconnect from the ground from which they're from. And then hopefully later, through traumatic experience, can recover themselves and rediscover the greater whole. and undergo a conversion experience. Midlife crisis, so well described by Jung, and then beautifully described by Washburn, regeneration in spirit, and finally integration. Regeneration in spirit being the, as it were, after the dark night of the soul in the midlife crisis, that there's an attempt by people typically in their 50s and 60s by which they attempt to recover their soul and the meaning of the world. I guess that's why we're all here, because this recovery process is a re-enchantment of the cosmos and a re-enchantment of ourselves and a rediscovery of ourselves in the spirit. And finally, the integration procedure, which happens in the last stage of life. This is a chronology which you don't have to take literally, it can change and so on, but in the integration experience as being some final experience in which the ego is then, after having been long thought it was dominant, returns as to be subordinate to the ground. The master, the emissary, the ego, and analytic intelligence, the modern worldview, scientific method, our separated egos and our personalities so invested in power and division and control and so on, return to the ground, return to the greater source of things and become integrated within it. And Jung, who I end this whole 3-year cycle on, because I can't think of a better person to end it with, gives us an individuation process which has been simply described, oversimplification, as a stadial process where you look at your persona, how you present yourself to the world. You look at your shadow, which is essential to all psychological growth. You integrate your animus and anima, the different parts of yourself, the contrasexual parts, the female in the male and the male in the female. And then the individuation process and the discovery of the numinous and the greater spirit of things. And in this individual growth process, which is organically programmed within you to happen, just as you're meant to grow into a human being with certain hair color and eyes and height and body size and so on, so too your spirit and your personality is destined to grow. This is not speculation. This is not idle theory. We find it so much in people's dreams. There's mountains of evidence for this organic, even unconscious shift in human beings to repair ourselves, to grow, to integrate all parts of ourselves in our split off nature and our divided nature and create a genuine whole, I was going to say elephant, whole self. And finally, I don't quite want to end on the West and the Western's contribution, because so much of this has been said in the East, hasn't it? And that this picture, which I've shown you so often, but which shows, just to remind you once again, the nature of the cosmos, the flames of the cosmos flaming out to the edge of our consciousness and the edge of the cosmos, the right hand and left hand showing the drum bringing things into existence, the fire which destroys everything, the poise of the dancer, and the acceptance and grace standing on top of the small giant, the ego, which has to be replaced by this greater vision of an integrated unity between ourselves and the cosmos, and in ourselves, all the different parts of ourselves, as well as our community. This is what we strive for in the integration process. But it can only happen if the ego and all its machinations and all its illusions is subordinate to the greater self. So that ends our 3-year cycle.